So I feel like I have to apologize because the sermon ended up a little longer than I expected. I know. It's just that on Wednesday midday, in front of a crowd of nearly 3,000 students at a college in northern Utah, the right-wing provocateur Charlie Kirk was assassinated. And, I already had a plan for something I wanted to say, but this needs to be addressed. There's a suspect in custody, Tyler Robinson. He's a 22-year-old white man from Utah, raised in a MAGA family with connections to law enforcement. And despite the early and false reports that came from the Wall Street Journal that he had etched pro-trans messages on the bullets, he seems actually to have been influenced by another right-wing, ultra-right-wing competitor, Nick Fuentes. And he possibly acted because he didn't think that Charlie Kirk was conservative enough. And I'm cautious as I lift up these details about the assassin because in the race to get the scoop in this digital age, very often this means that the news sources, and I include social media and news aggregators like Reddit, play it fast and loose, knowing that it's easier to move on from a mistake by simply putting out new content than it is to actually spend time trying to get the facts correct. We live now in a world where news is ephemeral and the currency is not the truth, but intensity, outrage, and hot takes. Additionally, it's highly likely that the assassin will present a confusing set of beliefs. The FBI now uses the term salad bar extremism when trying to diagnose these lone wolf attacks because the assailants rarely have views that can be easily mapped onto a left-right spectrum. They're finding that most people engaging in this type of behavior are not as ideologically pure as they are described either on the internet or in various other news outlets. Historically, political violence was organized by groups, but increasingly people are being radicalized online and acting alone. In an article written by Derek Thompson in The Atlantic called The Antisocial Century, he reviewed the writing of Danish political scientist Michael Bank-Petersen, who has done work on this idea that he calls the need for chaos. There's a certain share of the electorate, Peterson says, that has a violent, chaotic drive that sees politics as a kind of dark entertainment, and they just want to watch the world burn. And when he looked at who was most likely to feel this need for chaos, at the top of the list were men who self-described as socially isolated. And Thompson goes on to say that the lack of a life script for young men these days is contributing to some of this, but also social media seems to be allowing people to cosplay as revolutionaries from the comfort of their air-conditioned rooms where they are engaging in nothing revolutionary. The online violent talk is all empty talk until one person is inspired and then it isn't empty talk anymore. Time will tell what Tyler Robinson's actual motivations were, but they likely won't be as easily defined as we might have imagined. Unlike his killer, however, we know quite a lot about Charlie Kirk. Kirk hosted a daily 3-hour radio show since 2020 with somewhere between 500,000 to 750,000 downloads every day, making it the 21st most popular show on Apple Podcasts. On his show, and at many of his public appearances, he would say things like, birth control makes women angry and bitter, which makes them perfect candidates for the Democratic Party. Yeah, it's funny if it weren't funny, right? He says it screws up females' brains, and trans people are sick, and that transgender women in women locker rooms should be taken care of the way we used to take care of things in the 1950s and 60s. Yeah, he said that. He believed that white people were being bred out of existence by immigrants that he called illegal, and that prowling blacks go around for fun to target white people. He said that Islam is the sword the left is using to slit the throat of America. So we know a lot about Charlie Kirk, and it all points to the fact that he was a charismatic, xenophobic hate-monger who got rich and politically powerful by engaging in what academics call stochastic terrorism, which is a form of politically motivated violence where influential individuals or groups use indirect, vague, or coded language to demonize a target, inspiring statistically predictable but individually unpredictable acts of violence from susceptible individuals. This rhetoric is often spread through media, allowing the instigator plausible deniability, as the specific perpetrator may act alone and without direction or direct connection to the inciting incident. This is who Charlie Kirk was, a man who got rich and powerful by trying to create a society where the most vulnerable among us lived in fear of harm and death. He was a vile man. The American media is divided in its coverage of the assassination. Outlets traditionally viewed as centrist have shown incredible moral cowardice disguised as decorum, as they call for an end to political violence while whitewashing the impact Kirk had on American culture. The editorial board of the Boston Globe published a piece titled, "We Need More Charlie Kirks." The editorial included no actual quotes from Kirk himself for reasons that are all too obvious. MSNBC, a network often accused of left-wing bias, which is really that's such a preposterous statement. It only exists because there is the absence of any media on the left in the U.S., but nevertheless, it's accused of left-wing bias. It fired commentator Michael Dowd, who, when asked to talk about the environment in which a shooting like this happens, he said, speaking of Kirk, he's been one of the most divisive, especially divisive younger figures in this, who is constantly pushing this sort of hate speech aimed at certain groups. And I always go back to hateful thoughts lead to hateful words, which then lead to hateful actions. And I think that is the environment we're in. You can't stop with these hateful thoughts you have and then say these hateful words and not expect awful actions to take place. And that's the unfortunate environment we're in. And for that, he got fired. I'm not sure what he said that was wrong, but MSNBC President Rebecca Coulter described Dowd's comments as inappropriate, insensitive, and unacceptable. Meanwhile, Fox News host Jesse Waters had this to say: "They're at war with us. Whether we want to accept it or not, what are we going to do about it?" Steve Bannon on his podcast, The War Room, declared, "Charlie Kirk is a casualty of war. We are at war in this country." Elon Musk, never one to be silent, tweeted, because I refuse to say whatever they call it now. I don't even know what you do on that thing, X now. Tweeted, "If they won't leave us in peace, then our choice is to fight or die." Yeah, exactly. What a jerk. That's my pastoral message. What a jerk. A day after Kirk's death on September 11th, Donald Trump announced that Kirk would posthumously be awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Ugh. Where is Rebecca Coulter's denunciation of this speech and behavior? Silent. In what feels like unrelated news, on Friday, 2 days ago, UC Berkeley announced that it had shared with Trump the Trump administration 160 names of faculty members and students as part of an investigation into alleged anti-Semitic incidents, including Judith Butler, who is Jewish. It's crazy. Charlie Kirk's organization, Turning Point, aggressively harassed academic institutions with their professor watch list and their school board watch list programs that list academic staff they believe discriminate against conservative students, promote anti-American values, and advance leftist propaganda in the classroom. I add this piece because these are dangerous times in America, and the media and our institutions of higher learning are failing to tell the truth about what is happening, possibly believing that compliance will make it go away. But it won't. And we do not need more Charlie Kirks. Taking a stand and showing moral courage can be frightening, particularly when dealing with a political juggernaut that routinely advocates violent solutions. And when there is such moral courage, such little moral courage in our world, the truth is the first victim, but once the truth has fallen, there may be no bottom to the pit that we are digging for ourselves. So in the last few years in the U.S., we've seen the assassinations of Kirk, the assassination of Brian Thompson, the healthcare executive, the assassination of the Minnesota House Speaker Melissa Hortman and her husband Mark, the shooting of Minnesota State Senator John Hoffman and his wife Yvette, the attack on Nancy Pelosi's husband with a hammer, the plot to kidnap and kill the governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, and calls for lynching Vice President Mike Pence by the January 6th terrorists. All from right-wing extremists or men who are right-wing adjacent. The political violence, it seems for the moment anyway, relatively contained south of the border. And we're sort of peering over the fence. I had this image of me peering over the fence and seeing a wildly aggressive dog just kind of wondering if it was rabid or not, you know? But this isn't to say that Canada has been exempt. Many of you likely live with memories of the FLQ. But we've also witnessed a rise in the Trump-style populist nationalism here in Canada that has been attacking elites, undermining trust in institutions, and scapegoating outsiders. We've seen a decrease in the number of violent attacks perpetrated by groups, but an increase by lone wolf attackers, radicalized online. In Alberta, groups like Take Back Alberta, they've pushed the governing party into the hard right territory, emboldening leaders like Danielle Smith to legitimize once fringe conspiracy rhetoric and to pass policies that target LGBTQ youth. At the federal level, we've seen conservative leader Pierre Poilievre court the convoy protesters as defenders of liberty, signaling how populist anger has now entered the political mainstream. And in Quebec, while we haven't seen the radicalization in the same degree, the rise of the CAQ has brought exclusionary nationalist policies to the center of provincial politics, most notably the hardline stance against immigration that echoes themes long promoted by the far-right groups such as La Meute. However, during the pandemic, the CAQ took a hard line in favor of restrictions, which opened space for the fringe right-wing party, Parti conservateur de Québec, the PCQ, which capitalized on the anti-mask and anti-vax sentiment, and in the 2022 provincial election, it won 13% of the vote, suggesting that there is a population in Quebec that is susceptible to this anti-woke conspiracy-tinged populism that we've been seeing out west, even if it's not fully represented in the governing CAQ. We're not immune. The same forces have begun to operate here. It is coming over the border. That fence is not keeping those voices out. So where are the truth tellers? For the last 6 months, I've been thinking a lot about the Hans Christian Andersen story, The Emperor's New Clothes. For those of you who haven't heard the story in a few years, the plot revolves around an emperor who loves clothes so much that he forgets to govern his empire because he's too busy changing outfits every hour. And he's introduced to a couple of tailors who tell him that they are able to weave cloth of the most beautiful colors and patterns, and the clothes made from this wonderful cloth will be invisible to anyone who is unfit for the job he held or who has a very simple character. But the thing is, they're not weavers. We know the story. They're not weavers. They're charlatans who weave nothing and who prey on the vanity of the emperor and the court, making them all look like buffoons as they fall over themselves, exclaiming the beauty of his new outfit while the emperor stands in his underwear. And the hucksters are finally exposed by a young child who simply says the truth, that the emperor has nothing on. You know, the story is wonderful on many levels, right? There's the wisdom of the child who just says what they say. Sometimes they say it too truthfully. There is the vanity that causes us to be silent about things that we don't understand because we don't want to appear stupid. And there is the collusion and compliance of adults, right? Revealing how sophistication or the desire for sophistication can become cowardice. And while the emperor and his court make for wonderful victims, I actually believe that it can be harder to see the truth that is right in front of us than we like to admit because we have invested so much in a certain reality. We honestly want it to be true. There are a lot of people in America who are like, this democracy is going to survive. Is it? Not with this media, not with these institutions. We like to pretend like there is a reality there, a certain reality, even if it's no longer true, even if it was never true. And it requires a lot of courage to say something isn't true when everyone else, important people, powerful people, are saying that it is. You know, there's a line in the gospel. I don't talk about the gospel a lot. It's not, Christian Bible isn't one that really feeds me, but there is a line that is in all four gospels. And given how heavily these documents were edited, for the phrase to exist in all four, this means two things to me. Either it actually has the authority of being said by Jesus, or it was a value important enough for the early church to keep it. And the line is, and I'm using the one from Luke in the translation from the NRSV because that's the one I like the best, but the others are essentially the same. It reads, and Jesus said, he said, "Truly I tell you, no prophet is accepted in a prophet's hometown." We love to think that we love the prophets, but really, the truth tellers. But really, we like it when they're telling the truth about those people over there, right? There is a certain sermon in Unitarian churches, in the States anyway, that is like a gimme sermon. And weak ministers use it. And I call it the Republican bad sermon. I mean, it'll get you applause every time. Right? Partly because they're kind of bad. But it's not prophetic. Because it's very easy to be like, oh, well, you know, as far as I know, I've had one Republican in my entire church, 20 years, right? It's not prophetic when you're talking about people who are often out there. The prophet is not that welcome when they tell us the truth about our house, the truth about ourselves. It is as if they are calling us out for our nakedness when we when we believed that we were wearing fine garments, even if perhaps somewhere inside we knew that we really weren't. Nevertheless, we hate it when someone points this out to us. But we need some prophetic voices in our community. We cannot allow what is happening in the U.S. to take root here. And believing that Canadians are just nicer or less violent than Americans is not enough to keep it from happening, partly because it's not true. Anyone can be radicalized. Last week, I shared with you the story of Mary Traverson, who threw her wedding ring out the car window when her husband forbade her to bring her daughters to see Dr. Martin Luther King speak on the Washington Mall. It's an amazing story. I love it. I love it so much. Yeah, you missed that one. That's what happens when you take a week off, man. It's a story about knowing how to meet the moment when the moment arrives. But that's difficult. Right? The moment is here. The moment is here. Do we know? Do we understand this moment? Because if we don't, we're not going to be able to meet it. In 2012, I started a church in Williamsburg, a neighborhood in Brooklyn. And I named it after a book written by Matthew Fox, who was hugely influential on me. The book in the church was called Original Blessing. And I want to share with you a passage that continues to inform how I understand the world and my role as a minister well over a decade later. It reads, "On his deathbed, the great psychologist and lover of the human race, Erich Fromm, turned to his friend Robert Fox and asked, 'Why is it that the human race prefers necrophilia to biophilia?' A significant question. Why do we prefer the love of death to the love of life? Missiles to celebration, power over to power with, greed to letting go. Western civilization has preferred the love of death to the love of life to the very extent that its religious traditions have preferred redemption to creation, sin to ecstasy, and the individual introspection to cosmic awareness and appreciation. Religion," Fox writes, "has failed people in the West for one basic reason, for our culture's love of death. The recovery of creation-grounded spirituality promises newness and renewal to society, provided this recovery is not too late and not thwarted by a lot of backward-leaning battles in the old, tired, fall redemption theological preoccupations." You know, my humble translation, let me do this too. I was going to cut it, but he said, "Without this solid grounding in a creative vision, we become bored, violent people. We become necrophiliacs in love with death and power and principalities of death. By walking a path of affirmation, all creation breaks out anew." So my humble translation of this passage is simply this. The apocalypse is not foreordained. It's not a conclusion already. The vision of the apocalypse that is held forth by certain people is merely evidence of a mind in the grips of nihilism, a mind that worships the absence of meaning, that naturally leads us into a death cult. But there is another solution. We can fall in love. And through our obsessive love with life, we can channel creation's powers. How many of you saw the Barbie movie 2 years ago? That is not enough. No, it's not enough. It's a great movie. It's one of the most life-affirming movies I've seen in recent years. And there are a lot of, this is your homework. Go rent that thing. It's so good. There's a lot of messages about how to live fully as a woman, how to live fully as a human. And the story kind of revolves around the emancipation of Barbie Land from the patriarchy. But it wasn't the restoration of the matriarchy that actually liberated her. I know it's been a few years, but does anybody want to take a guess at what her moment of liberation was? It was a very quiet moment. She was sitting at a bus stop. Does anybody remember this scene? She was sitting at a bus stop And much like the Buddha's early awakening, she had just witnessed this montage of people arguing and loving each other and being lonely. And she witnessed the full spectrum of human emotions. And she cries for the first time in her life because she is present to what it means to be alive and to live with all of the heartbreak and the joy that it takes to be a human. And with tears still on her cheeks, she witnesses an old woman sitting next to her, and Barbie says, "You're beautiful." And the woman responds, "What? I know it." The woman responds, "I know it." And the director of Barbie, Greta Gerwig, had to fight for this scene, and she's quoted as saying it's a cul-de-sac of a moment. It doesn't lead anywhere. And in the early cuts, it was suggested, well, you could just cut it, and actually the story would move on just the same. And I said, if I cut the scene, I don't know what this movie's about. That's how I saw it. To me, this is the heart of the movie. It is in this moment that Barbie learns to walk away from the narrative of insecurity, and in that moment, Barbie learns that she can walk away from the idea of her creator. It's the first step in any love story. Self-love. If you cannot love yourself, you cannot love the world, which is why this religious focus on sin and redemption is a setup, it's a dark fantasy that has brought us to annihilation. When I see men like Charlie Kirk, I see necrophiliacs. When I see men like Tyler Robinson, I see men who are in love with death. When I look at Donald Trump, I see a false prophet tweeting at us, leading us into a death cult like the Pied Piper. But I don't believe in a great man theory. These men all rose out of oceans of sadness and fear, and they are merely just the waves cresting on the top of it all. The truth is, we just don't love ourselves enough. We're too insecure. We all want to be that wise old woman, the crone, the voice of Sophia, inviting us to know that we are beautiful just as we are. But we're not there yet. And as a result, we're still giving birth to these men, and it's going to take some practice to walk away from this narrative of insecurity, that finite game that we're always going to lose. The one that tells us that we're not enough, that we need something else, whatever that looks like. It's a setup that is walking us into a death cult where the solutions to our problems are always violent because that's the only way we can understand this world. We need to tell the truth about who we are if we want to be able to meet the moment, and the moment is here. So we need to do a little practice today. You are so beautiful. You are so beautiful. You are so beautiful. You are so beautiful. I know it. You are so beautiful. If you're watching at home, join in. You're not saying it for me to hear, you're saying it for you to hear. You are so beautiful. This is the heart of life. That's easier to say when I'm prompting you, so it takes some practice. But this is resistance. In an interview with Matthew Fox, he says, necrophilia grows when biophilia is stunted. It's a profound statement on evil, but it also shows us the way out of necrophilia. Life is really about biophilia. We have to fall in love on a regular basis. I say we should fall in love 3 times a day. And I don't say that to threaten anyone's marriage or relationship, but to get us out of that anthropomorphic mindset. You can fall in love with wildflowers, with trees, with stones, with animals, with planets, with galaxies, with music, with poetry. There's so much to fall in love with. And I think when there's enough falling in love going around, that we will choose biophilia, the love of life, over necrophilia. Now, the world is spiraling in violence and recrimination, and we need resistance. Go fall in love today, at least 3 times. Let go of the anthropomorphic mindset and fall in love with this beautiful world, this beautiful cosmos, which does include beautiful human beings, some of whom know it and some of whom don't know it yet, partly because they haven't met you. Liberation is not an individual affair. We are all woven together, and our salvation from this apocalypse is not about adhering to the right rules. It is about loving the hell out of this world. And every story begins with self-love. You are so beautiful. Absolutely.